Hello, friends, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Raymond Nicolet Trust Podcast. My name is Gavrilo Nikolic, and every month I bring you inspiring conversations about the future of education, science, and philanthropy from world top academics, scientists, Nobel Prize winners, and philanthropists. My guest today is Dr. Predrag Slijepcevic. Predrag is the senior researcher and the research coordinator at the Brunel University in London, where he teaches genomic and molecular medicines. Predrag has specialized in radiation biology and has written numerous articles focusing on DNA repair and DNA damage response. If you're curious to learn more about Predrag and his research, you need to listen to this episode. In just a moment, the one and only Dr. Predrag Slijepcevic. Professor, welcome to the RNT podcast.
Hello, Gavrilo.
Thank you very much for finding time to speak with me. Let us start with basics. Where are you currently and what are you doing as we speak?
I do two kinds of research. One is a pure laboratory research, which is medically related. My interests at present are the mechanisms behind the processes of aging, how we age. Can we sort of enable people who get, say, over 50 to age in a healthy way? Also, how the cancer becomes a disease, how cells that are normal turn into cancerous. So that kind of research, and the focus of my research is the structure or structures called telomeres. These are physical ends of chromosomes. We find them in cells. And what is known about these is that they get shorter as we get older. And there is a clear mechanism as to how they work. Three scientists received a Nobel Prize for medicine for discovery of telomeres and the enzyme called telomerase in 2009. So I've been in this field for over 20 years, maybe 25, even 30 years, something like that, and published quite a lot. And at the moment, we try to explore various aspects of this telomere biology that could help us with understanding aging, how we can make aging understood better, and then enable medicine to allow us to age in a healthy way, and also the mechanisms behind cancer. But in the last maybe a decade or so, last 10 years, I developed interest in what's known as philosophy of biology. All scientists, when they get older, I'm now sort of over 50, and interests expand, and we all get interested in what's life, for example, and how we see ourselves and all other organisms in the biosphere in the new light. Not only the sort of anthropocentric and medical, but also say how do bacteria age? How do other organisms age? What's the role of bacteria in the biosphere, and how this could help us understand various health-related issues. So these two areas, research in experimental research in the field of telomere biology, aging and cancer, and also the other one, philosophy of biology.
If I may just take a step back from what you just said, or if we both can just take a step back, was this something that you started looking at already during your bachelor studies, let's say, a while ago, or you first focus on some other areas and then develop interest through working on other areas before focusing on how cells age?
Yes, the answer is in part yes. When I was undergrad student, I studied in former Yugoslavia at the University of Sarajevo, and even then I developed interest in the basic processes in cell biology and how these relate to medicine. Actually, I studied veterinary medicine. So it really doesn't, there are not too many differences at the level of cells, whether you look at animal cells or human cells, this is all the same. And when I graduated, I got a fellowship or a stipend to do PhD at the University of Sarajevo. That was it was over 30 years ago, before the war started in Bosnia and in former Yugoslavia. It was 1988, something like that. So I started PhD in what's known then as radiation biology, but I sort of specialized in medical genetics and how radiation, for example, damages DNA, and how this translates into various lesions that lead to aging or cancer. So yes, I had those interests almost from the beginning of my academic career. And once when I got a PhD, and I defended my PhD at the University of Sarajevo before the war, and immediately after that I got a job at the University of Cambridge. So I got into a laboratory that was really world-leading laboratory specializing in cancer genetics. So that sort of knowledge that I accumulated during my PhD years, I was able to immediately translate into a practical research project.
Before we jump on DNA research further on, I would just like to ask you, because you have been in academia for 30 years, how do you see the developments? Do people mostly focus after their PhD studies on other stuff, or they kind of continue to follow what they researched in previous 3 to 5 years during their PhD studies? Just out of curiosity.
Yeah, there are no hard rules. I know people who were excellent PhD students. Really, everyone was sort of predicting them a stellar career in at universities. But then many of these people simply didn't want to go there and ended up in various companies. But also, I personally had students doing PhD with me who were not very good students, by academic standards, not the students that were the best in their generation, but really once they sort of developed enough interest in a subject, they've been able to push, the research borders and get excellent PhDs, and then, go through the academic career. I know several people who went through that. Not very good students as undergrad students, but then doing PhD, they really mature and develop strong interests and continue with a very strong academic career. So there are no rules, really.
Getting back to DNA research, what are some of the latest scientific trends when it comes to DNA research? I guess one of the questions that many of our listeners are giving to themselves or hoping to have answered soon rather than later is how soon we will be able to go to our GPs to repair our DNA like we go to repair our teeth to the dentist office.
I think this is already happening. I'm sort of talking from the perspective of what's going on in the UK, United States as well. There are many small private companies that immediately started this business of translating what's found. I mean, now we can sequence the entire human genome very cheaply. The Human Genome Project that was completed almost 20 years ago was a landmark project that determined the structure of the human DNA in full. And the cost of that project was $3 billion US. So it was one of the costliest projects in the history of science. But today, thanks to various advances, I can sequence my genome or your genome or genome of any other person for a few $100s. So it's so cheap. And now there are companies that do that and basically take your own DNA and based on the knowledge of genes predict what sort of disease you may have in 10 years, 20 years, etc. But in the United Kingdom, there is this big health, I think it's a national kind of health system called NHS, National Health System. And they already started collecting DNA. They have an ambitious project to sequence thousands of genomes of thousands of people, put that in a database, and then try to see whether, based on these results, they can predict whether someone will, say, have predisposition to cancer, to cardiovascular diseases, to dementia, Alzheimer, and not only that, but a range of various diseases. So whether we can that's already happening, the knowledge of DNA being translated or genomics translated into medicine. Whether we can intervene or try to, say, remove faulty genes from our genomes, that's an open question. And that will, with time, it will happen. Only 2 years ago, two ladies from the United States got the Nobel Prize in chemistry for a new technique that allows what we call genome editing. So genome editing is something that, for example, you identify a faulty gene. A person is born with, say, disease called cystic fibrosis. That's a famous genetic disease. So with this technique, the hope is that you can take the faulty gene, replace it with a healthy version of that gene, and you will have, a genetic disease cured. So I'm sure this will start happening maybe in a few years' time. There are already some advances based on genetics, based on DNA. For example, only recently, a few weeks ago, scientists have been able to take a virus and then program the virus to attack cancer cells. Everything through genetics, through the knowledge of DNA. And the results were staggering. I think it was publicized in the media that this new virus that targets the genome of cancer cells could kill them. So I think as the time passes, maybe the next 5-10 years, there will be more advances in that area. And no doubt that we will be able to intervene in at the molecular level and perhaps try or start replacing faulty genes with the healthy ones.
But then we will finally achieve something the policymakers and regulators have been trying to do for the last 10 years, and it's really true personalized medicines in the end of the day.
Yeah, I think personalized medicine is much older. I think it's, some people call it genomic medicine. I actually lecture students on that. And this is, now perhaps in the third decade. So that started the end of 1990s. So personalized medicine, really, with the help of genetics, you can do many things that the conventional medicine can't. A typical example, one of the first that doctors encountered, and the United States is probably the leading country in that area. So they had a boy who had leukemia, a 4-year-old boy, and he was given, leukemia in children is curable. So you get a dose of radiation or some chemicals, and if you're lucky, you can get cured. But what happened with John, a genetic test identified that he's very sensitive to a chemical that's used as a therapy. And without that genetic test, the therapy would probably kill him. But luckily, doctors realized that he had that faulty gene, so they prescribed a very, very reduced dose of the chemical, and he was at the end cured. So the area of personalized genomic medicine has already started. And I think one of the downsides of that is that it's very costly, and it's requires high level of expertise. And I guess this can only be done at top institutions, mostly United States, some in Europe, and maybe Japan.
Professor, as we mentioned in the beginning of our conversation, you teach students genomic and molecular medicine. Basically, from my understanding, you can correct me in that one. So you actually do a lot of your teachings also in the lab. So bearing in mind, we were under lockdowns over the last 2 years, and then we are now kind of reinventing ourselves after a period of closures in all our societies and countries where we live in. How difficult was this for you to be teach students during these 2 years? How do you see these 2 years? Do you see it as a period of reflection, or do you think that actually your line of work, genomic and molecular medicine, suffered because you were not able to be in labs all the time?
It was a big challenge. I think it was a shock for all of us. March 2020, when the pandemic, came to Europe and the lockdown. So we had to basically close teaching spaces, lecture rooms, laboratories. Luckily for us, it was the end of the academic year. So that year, students and we who lectured didn't suffer too much. But the year after that, that was 2020-21. So that's that academic year. We had to do teaching entirely online. And a subject area like genomic medicine, you can't really do much without, doing things in the laboratory. But we had to invent various, novel strategies, and I think we survived very well. So instead of sending students to the lab, we had to, compile the material mostly from the internet and from the other institutions, show the videos of how things work in the lab, and then develop a kind of sort of mimic those real life scenarios through, mostly videos. But also we introduced a kind of interactive teaching and we discovered some values in that interactive teaching, even though it was online. We sort of had to be quite imaginative to improve, student experience without having access to the laboratory. So what happened to me, every single laboratory program that I had for students, I had to do online in a new way. So, but, one of those areas that we developed, for example, modern microscopes that we use for analyzing cells, they are all digital. So you only need, a computer screen, so you can project your microscope picture directly from the microscope onto a screen, and then everyone online can see it. So that, those areas we explored, and then we try to, for example, every student who graduates from our university must do a final year project. That's the standard in all universities. So the final year project is a major piece of work that's usually laboratory based. But in that year, we didn't have any, access to labs, so we had to invent sort of projects that are based on various softwares, but still have enough scientific power to allow students to demonstrate their knowledge. This year is different. So this year we have a hybrid system. We returned partially to the labs, and we do teaching in the, lecture classes. But I think from next year, everything will be back from normal. From September, no more, even if there is high level of COVID, decision has been made, everything goes back to normal.
Quite interesting to hear that. Professor, we also mentioned it, and you mentioned extensively in your intro statement, if I can call it that way, that you're now interested also in physical biology. Can you tell us a bit more about this field of work and what attracted you now to focus on this area next to everything else you're working on?
Yeah, I call it philosophy of biology. When I was a student, apart from sort of doing my vet medicine degree, I was also interested in philosophy, literature, etc. So I took a part-time study in philosophy then, and tried to combine my scientific experience and expertise with my sort of limited knowledge of philosophy. But that developed with time. Then I was in Cambridge, and then moved to Leiden in Holland, and then worked also at the University of St Andrews in Scotland. I met people who are not scientists. So one good area that scientists can do is to make their field interactive or multidisciplinary, combine their ideas with colleagues who don't know what science is, like philosophers or artists. So for me, philosophy of biology was always kind of at the back of my mind until maybe 10 years ago, when I started thinking about that more deeply and then started publishing papers. And I published 2 books, actually in Serbian, but I have my first book in philosophy of biology just finished now, and I've given the manuscript to an American publisher. So hopefully this will be published, I hope, next year. So, I mean, the area I'm interested in, this book is called Biocivilizations. Biocivilization is something that's not exactly human civilization, but my research shows that every single organism from bacteria to insects, other animals, even plants, have their own cognitive worlds, and they very much look like our own civilization. I mean, when you investigate ants, for example, you find out that they have capacities to do medicine, for example. Ants invented in the nests in which they live. They put drugs that kill bacteria. They simply collect from nature what's known as resin conifer pieces. They put that in the nest, and it's known that this has antimicrobial effects. And not only that, they combine those pieces of resin that kill bacteria, combine that with some liquid that their body produces, and this has even more potent killing of microbes. There are some sort of ants that these are known as warrior ants, for example, and they attack the other insects, but these sometimes develop into wars, and they suffer, they get wounded, and their mates actually take them back to the nest and then do operation on them. So ants can even do surgery. And it's not only ants. I mean, I'm just, mentioning one species, but there are many things that different species can do, and we can learn a lot from those species to improve our own understanding of ecology. I mean, as we progress through the 21st century, we realize that one of the biggest problems facing humanity is ecological crisis, and certainly the other species in their histories encountered similar crises. So if we can discover those and identify how they resolve their crisis, we can perhaps apply those to resolve our own, ecological crisis.
Couldn't agree more. Speaking of combining your two disciplines or two lines of work, where do you see yourself over the next 10 years? Focusing more on one than the other, or combining both?
I think the answer is combining both, because really where we start seeing values, new values, is when we try to mix different areas of expertise, and then through that you identify some novel approaches that are always more productive than if you focus only on a single one, because you miss the big picture. So if you're able to combine 2, 3, even more, and that's why science is becoming increasingly multidisciplinary. As a biologist or as a sort of medical doctor, you can't solve all the problems. But if you include colleagues like mathematicians, statisticians, computer scientists, experts in artificial intelligence, then combine that with, say, genomic medicine, because genomics is actually a computer science, and then try to resolve problems from cell biology, genetics, apply that on human diseases, and you will have success. So the answer really is the combination of various things.
Professor, I forgot to ask you when we were discussing your professorship, if I can call it that way, what is the single thing you like the most about your work?
Well, I think my experience is that most academics like their jobs, but the single most positive experience for me, and I guess for the majority of my colleagues, is that you have, and this depends on the environment, but most universities, say in the UK or in the United States, in Europe as well, that was the case so far. They simply give you the intellectual freedom. So the intellectual freedom is you invent your own ideas, and if you're able to attract money, because you can't do research without money, and universities do not provide money, so you have to apply for money to various institutions like government bodies. I mean, European Union, that was one big failure of the British system, Brexit. We lost access to some European Union grants, but this is now things change. So even if you're in Britain, you can still apply to European Union research money. So essentially, if you have intellectual freedom to pursue your own ideas, that's the best you can do. So I guess then most academics don't see their jobs as, I have to do it from 9 to 5. No, that becomes like, a very sort of interesting job that you don't really see it as job with the obligation, but something that gives you the freedom to develop your talent for doing research.
Fascinating. Professor, before we close, I would like to ask you if there is anything you would like to add, any last words, anything that we missed to mention so far?
Not really, apart from saying thank you and good luck with the charity that you are involved in.
Thank you very much, Professor. Thank you for being my guest on the RNT podcast.
My pleasure.